Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside today. A very exciting day for me as I get to share with you my complete review, setup, and full tune of the 2020 Elite KURE and the new ASYM tri-track cam technology from Elite, as well as the S.E.T technology with the movable limb pockets. Very excited about this bow, and I want to share everything about it, from how I went from this box to this full setup to these bareshaft bullet holes. I'll put all the time tags for the applicable parts of this full review and tune and setup in the description below, and I'll also throw the specs of the KURE here on the screen so I don't have to bore you with all of those details. I just want to go through this as I have felt the bow has worked for me, what I'm particularly enjoying about it, and what about the bow I think is incredibly revolutionary for a lot of different bow companies, but in particular Elite. So first things first, let's talk about the specs of this bow that I have found to be amazing and a really great thing for people like me who tinker at home, or for you at home if you want to tune your bow even without the use of a bow press. Let's first start off with the asymmetrical tri-track cam technology. So in the past, Elite has been a binary cam system, and they are still holding true to a binary cam system. What a binary cam system means is that both the top and bottom cams work on the same track, the same module system. There's no split yokes at the top or the bottom. So this is a 3-track, where in the past we've seen a 2-track. And a 3-track cam system allows for one cable to be on one side of the cam and the other cable to be on the other side of the cam, not on the limbs, on the cam, and that helps with your cam lean. When you have a 2-track system, both cables are on one side of the cam, and that pulls a little bit in terms of the cam lean when you're at full draw, or maybe when the bow is resting at brace. So now with the two cables interacting with each other, opposite of each other, we're now able to eliminate a lot of that cam lean at brace and at full draw. Now some people found that could cause issues with tuning, and they had to shim their cams one way or the other depending on how they were getting their arrows to tear through paper or in some sort of other tuning process. With the ASYM tri-track cam technology, you have completely eliminated that. I have no cam lean out of this bow at brace or at full draw, even at my long draw length of 30.5 inches. Now the ASYM of course refers to being these cams being asymmetrical. In the past with Elites, with their binary cam system, the top cam and the bottom cam look exactly the same. In this case, the top cam looks a little bit different from the bottom cam, but the modules look exactly the same, and the way that they are rotating and tuning is also exactly the same. It's just the shape of the cams and how the strings go around the track. It's still 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom. And speaking of the cams with the modules, this is the first time ever for Elite running a rotating module. In the past, they've had specific for the draw length modules that you had to put the bow into a press, take the string and cables off, then take the modules off, and then put the new modules on, which made for us that work in a shop a little bit difficult to work on the Elites of the past. Now, these still were great bows. I still have owned and shot really well a whole bunch of their older models, but this case now, you can at home without the need of a bow press change your draw length and change your let-off settings. And let's talk about that really quickly. So in the past, Elites have only been limb stop options. That means you have that really solid back wall, but a lot of people and a lot of other bow manufacturers make cable stop bows, and some people like that softer back wall. Elite has answered that with a cable stop and a limb stop option on the same cam, and you can run it in a couple different ways. You can run straight cable stops to get you that little bit softer back wall. You could run the cable stop and the limb stop, which is what I'm choosing to do, because the cable stop contacts just slightly before the limb stop, so you get that little bit of give, and then it hits a solid, rock solid back wall with that limb stop option, which is something I really enjoy. The other thing you can do is run it straight limb stops, which is a little bit shorter valley and a little bit higher percentage of holding weight and a little bit less let off. So I have it right now set in the max let off position, as high as I can possibly get it, which gives me a little bit of a deeper valley and allows for me to have both that cable stop and limb stop option active at the same time. So if that wasn't enough, they added the S.E.T technology system in the limb pocket. So they were able to eliminate a lot of the cam lean issue, but when you have a binary cam system, you have to move your rest, and really with any cam system, you have to move your rest to help eliminate left-right tears through paper when you go to bareshaft tune or paper tune with a fletched shaft. The S.E.T limb technology allows the limb pocket to pivot a little bit of rotation either way to help shim the limbs, which is something something that people actually did in the past. They would literally take the bow, put it in a press, remove the string cables, relax the limbs completely out, add shims to the underside of the limb where it would come in contact with the limb pocket and raise one limb higher or lower than the other. And that allowed for the tear of the paper and allowed the limbs to deflect a little bit differently and help with that tune. But as you can imagine, that's quite time consuming, and if you aren't comfortable with working on bows, and in particular if you don't own a bow press, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle. With the S.E.T technology, with just a few turns of an Allen screw or two, you can completely eliminate all of the tears through paper. I've done that towards the end of this video, and again, follow the time tags if you're more interested on how I played with the S.E.T technology. Some other things we've seen in the past from Elite that are continuing on the KURE, as well as the Elite Result, which is the target version of this bow. We still have the LTR, or the linear tunable roller guard, which in the old case with the binary cam systems, we were allowed to alleviate some pressure on the cams, but here it's used for fletching clearance more than anything else. If you want to shoot a big fat indoor arrow with tall, high feathers or vanes to add a lot of steerage in that short 20-yard distance, you can move that LTR out away from the riser, and that'll give you that extra clearance. If you want it in real tight and shoot a low profile vane for 3D or really skinny target arrow for outdoor like FITA shooting or something like that, you can move it in as well. Just another piece of the puzzle in the whole tuning process, and just adds to the overall modularity and tunability of the bow. The riser on the Result and the KURE look fantastic. Lots of really cool cutouts helped save on the weight of the riser. We still are seeing the multiple bridging portions on the bottom and the top half of the riser, adds a lot of stability and rigidity to the riser to eliminate flex, to eliminate vibration, and ultimately have a cleaner shot. Another thing we've seen this year is 2 burger button holes, and that allows you to really align that rest perfectly level with the shelf and really help in the tuning process. You don't have to kind of eyeball it, put it up and down, pitch it perfect. You can actually put 2 bolts in there if you want into your rest and really have that rest sitting perfectly level, parallel with the shelf. So without further ado, let's actually get into the shop. Let's open this box right out of the package, take off the bubble wrap, and start the full setup and full review and the full tune of this bow from box to bullet hole. All right, so we have the 2020 Elite KURE, the flagship hunting bow from Elite this year. Super excited. This bow is packed with modularity and the ability to tune in so many different ways. I am super excited to dive right into it, but we'll get to all that here in a minute. First, let's start off with step 1, which is pull everything out of the box, obviously, and do not disregard your manual. This is so important. Whether you think you know the bow or not, I have read this front to back and then some. You definitely want to make sure you're reading the manual to understand all the ins and outs of your bow. And if this is a type of bow that you've never seen before, this is a 3-track binary asymmetrical cam system. It's brand new for Elite, and it's pretty new in terms of a lot of other brands on the market. It's a good idea to pull out your smartphone, take some pictures of what you see here as it comes stock from the factory, and particularly if you're going to be putting this into a bow press yourself and messing around with the tuning and the twisting of the cables and string, you definitely want to make sure that you know what you're doing and that everything goes back exactly the way it was from factory specifications. You want to definitely make sure you're not missing any parts, and I've gone ahead and already snugged down all the bolts that needed to be snugged down. For example, the limb pocket screws, anything around modules that I don't want to be moving too much yet here. This bow is not set for my draw length from the factory. I'm gonna have to expand it all the way out to its 30-inch maximum, and that is okay. We'll get to all that here later on in the video. But after I've read the manual and I've taken pictures if necessary and definitely checked all the specs, we're now ready to move into step 2. So for step 2, I'm gonna set this bow up for me in terms of draw length. Now this is a rotating module, so I need to make sure I do both the top and bottom cams of this bow, and I also want to make sure that the draw stop locations I'm going to end up running the limb stops are also put in the same location. That'll help with cam timing later. In order to do this, we need to flip the bow over to access the module screws. And in this case, I can see they are a Torx head. Definitely make sure that if you are going to be changing out the modules or rotating the modules, you don't just start shoving Allen keys into places. A lot of bow manufacturers, including Elite, have used Torx head, and Elite has definitely used Torx heads for a very long time. Make sure that you are using the correct size one. In this case, I need a T20 Torx head, and I'm gonna go ahead and start loosening. I'm not going to unscrew completely just yet. I just want to do everything in a nice loose way, make sure I'm doing all the screws that need to be moved. In conjunction with the two T20s on either side, there is also a smaller one. So here's an example of one of the rotating modules. This is from the bottom cam. It can come completely out, no bow press needed, and it is marked all the way around for all of the witness marks depending on your draw length. I need the number 1, I need the largest, and that's why I had to remove all 3 screws. Some bows you won't have to remove all the screws, you just have to loosen them to allow the module to slide around the cam. But because I went from the 28-inch that comes from the factory all the way out to the 30, I needed to remove the screws in order to move it into different locations. Because I already went through and read the manual front to back, I know that down in here there is a witness hole that will tell me exactly what module number I'm on. I don't have to guess. There's sometimes a line, but in this case I love that perfect. It's like literally looking down through a rifle scope. I can see I'm on the number 1, and I can now add this module with the 3 screws back in on the 30-inch draw. Want to be very careful, in particular with module screws. They can very easily cross thread, and you can really gum up the threads of your cam modules, and you really don't want that to happen. I'm not going to snug them down super tight, just finger tight for now. Make sure that I'm getting them into all the appropriate slots, and then I'll do that for the top cam as well. All right, so we got our draw modules all the way around. We're now in the number 1 position on both sides, and now I'm going to install the limb stops. If you wanted to shoot this bow as a cable stop bow, you don't have to do anything further. You can mess around later with the let-off setting. This is currently in the highest let-off, 90% setting. We'll talk more about that later as we get into the actual tuning and getting this bow set up for my feel and how I like it. But I am going to go ahead and install the limb stops per the manual's instructions. I'm very familiar with the Elite limb stop system. I've really been a humongous fan ever since I started shooting Elite about 4 or 5 years ago. Absolutely love the limb stops. Gives a incredible back wall feel. Unlike the modules, the limb stops are on an Allen key set. They are not part of the Torx head system, so we'll get the appropriate Allen key. And I'm going to set it in the lowest let-off position, or excuse me, the highest let-off position, which again, we'll talk more about later when we get into the actual feel of the bow. Additionally, at this point, if this bow was not set from the factory to the poundage that I wanted, this is a 50 to 60 pound bow, and let's say I wanted to shoot it at 55 pounds. At this point, I would loosen the limb pocket locking screws and reduce the weight down to what I would assume to be 55 pounds. 3 full turns out from bottom is the maximum for this bow, so I would turn it approximately 1.5 turns, and I would get about that 55 pound weight. This is a 60 pound peak. That's where I want to shoot it, so I'm just going to leave it exactly how it is. So now we are ready to go ahead and start establishing nock height and where exactly I'm going to place the D-loop, and I like to use that by using a T-square. And I like lining up the bottom edge of the T-square here on the bottom edge. In this case, this KURE has 2 burger button holes. In older Elite models, we only saw 1. I like 2 because it's a really nice 90-degree dead set level. So I'll clip on this T-square, and I'll move it down till just this bottom edge here is just covering the bottom edge of the 2 burger holes. Then I will go off of this 0 mark here, and I will make a mark with a silver Sharpie, and I know that is where my nocking point I want to set is. You could also do the same thing by putting it in a bow vise and setting some levels on an arrow and that sort of stuff. I don't have the rest on here yet, so I'm not going to fiddle with that. I've had great success using a T-square. Also, there's an L-square out there, clips right into the string, perfect 90-degree angle each and every single time. I don't have to monkey around getting bubbles to sit perfect, so on and so forth. And now that I've made that silver Sharpie mark, I can remove this. I'm done with it, and I can start tying my nocking point. Now, a nocking point is not a necessary thing. I'm just going to tie a series of overhand knots here. As you see here is the silver Sharpie. I'm going to cover that from top to bottom, and then my arrow will sit on the top portion here against it with the D-loop knots on either side. This is called a soft knot. I like putting one on the bottom. Some people like putting one on the bottom and the top. Some people don't like doing any at all. I don't know if it helps my accuracy at all, but it's definitely peace of mind. It's something I've been doing for a very long time. I'm just tying a series of overhand knots, one on this side of the string and then one on the back side of the string, and I just work my way from top to bottom, building up that knot as I go along, and then when I get to the end, I will tie it off with a square knot, cut it, and burn the ends. Tying off with my square knot now. Make sure that's nice and pulled tight. And then sometimes you can take a knife and just cut that off. I'll just take a lighter and just burn it close. Burn these ends down, being very careful not to get too close to the center serving. Blow that out, give it a little push, and it'll melt onto itself. And now I have a great nocking point here. Again, my knock will sit on top of this, and my D-loop knot will be below it and above it. And that just allows for a little bit of pressure relief. In particular, if you have a long draw length like I do, 30 inches and over, if you're shooting a shorter, this isn't a short axle to axle bow by any means, but if you're going to shoot something that's under 32 inches, axle to axle in particular, I strongly recommend you tie a knot either top or bottom, just to help with that knock pinch if you have that 30-inch or over, or even a 29-inch and over draw length. All right, so ready to tie the D-loop. I have about a 4.5 to 5-inch piece of D-loop material. I don't like to cut a little short, skimpy piece and then be trying to fish the end through and burn it off. It's just kind of a mess. So I like to make it nice and long, and I can toss away the extra. It's okay. I have the top cam facing up on this end. I want to start on the top cam side of this string. So I'm going to start here. I want my knots to be facing different directions. So I'm going to tie one way, tie one the other. So I'm going to start here by pulling these on the back side of the string. So this is the archer side of the bow over here. And I'm going to fold them over and come down through themselves here. And this one here that's in my right hand is going to be my top knot. So I just pulled that over itself there. That's my top knot. I'm just going to kind of fish it through, make it nice and tight. Having a nice melted, you can see that nice glossy melted end on there is really important. Gives you a nice firm knot to build against. I'm just going to kind of mash it, give it a little bit of pull here. All right, so now I'm ready to make my bottom knot. I'm going to come on the front side of the string that's facing me, and I'm going to come up through this little hole, this little loop I just created here. I'm just going to kind of pull it tight. It looks like it would knot down onto itself if I pull it hard enough, but I don't want to do that. I still want to leave a loop there. I'm going to go back over the knot that I just made, come back on this side of the string, and then push my tag in through. Again, if you want to know a more in-depth and much better footage, please follow that link in the description below on how to tie a D-loop and a whole bunch of other things like tying in a peep as well. Have my D-loop set pretty tight here. That's going to stretch out significantly once I get the D-loop pliers on it. I'm going to cut off this tag end, go ahead and melt it, being very careful not to apply any heat towards the serving or the strands of my string. That would damage it in a hurry. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this off. I'm going to lay the bow down to do this part. I'm going to go ahead and fluff up the end of this D-loop material here. Make a nice melted knot. Again, very cautious heat here. I don't need to be applying tons of heat. Blowing out when necessary, pushing that ball down with my lighter. Make a nice flat end. Now I'm going to take my D-loop pliers, and you can use a pair of needle nose, something very fine like these. You can put those in there very gently. Don't want to cut the center serving of your string. Rotate it up around and then kind of give a little bit of pull by opening. And I'll do this just to kind of start my knot. It makes it easier when I go to actually use the D-loop pliers. You can see I have the startings there of a D-loop. Now if you want to invest in a fancy pair of D-loop pliers like this, you can. I'm not going to really crank down on this D-loop. I just want to make sure that I have my knot seated. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of pressure. Not a whole lot. A very little bit will do you. I'll take those very nice, soft, no teeth, right? These are very smooth shank needle nose here. I'm going to just close my knots a little bit. Again, inside here is my soft knot for my knocking point here. Inside you can see the soft knot for my knocking point, and then of course the two knots of the D-loop on the side. That is about probably maybe a 1/2 inch long D-loop, maybe a 5/8, and that'll stretch out a little bit more as we clip a release onto it. That is a perfect D-loop length, and that came out really nice. Good, nice, hard, big knots there, big melted ends. That's not going to pop off anytime soon. All right, so now at this point, I start putting this bow onto a drawboard. Now, if you want to invest in a drawboard, that's a good idea. I prefer to make my own. It cost me about 40 bucks all in all. I have it mounted here in my workshop. I make sure that not only do I clip onto the D-loop, but I also always have a safety onto the poundage scale. And now this is where I'm going to be checking cam synchronization, checking my limb stops are coming into contact on the limb pads at the same time. I'm checking with the scale, the actual poundage of the bow, and then I have a tape measure on my drawboard, and I'm actually able to measure the draw length. I know that I like my bows to be a little bit over 30 inches, closer to 30 and a half, and some even up to 31. And I know because I read my manual that in the highest let-off setting, this actually adds a half inch of draw length, which is perfect. I like shooting a high percentage let-off. I like to be up in that 85-90%, and that extra half inch will get me closer to 30 and a half, which is perfect. That's an absolute perfect fit for me. So I'm going to go put this on the drawboard, check all those specs, and I'll get back to you in a sec. All right, so I put the bow into a drawboard. It was coming in perfectly as 60.8 pounds, which makes sense because when I did my initial inspection, I checked all of the specs, the axle to axle length, the brace height, all that sort of stuff. So I knew that I was going to be getting a solid bow platform right out of the box. I moved the limb stops to be in a more appropriate location to get the right holding weight that I want. I want about that 80 to 85% holding weight, let off, excuse me. So I'm getting that perfect holding weight that I want right now, which is around 11 pounds. This is peaking at about 60.8 or 61 pounds, we'll just call it. So I'm getting a perfect peak weight, I'm getting a perfect holding weight, and the draw length is coming in at 30 and about 3/4, a little bit between 30 and a half and 30 and 3/4, which is perfect for me. I have drawn the bow back once or twice already. I just put an arrow on here, even though there's no rest. I just put a bareshaft on here, and it feels amazing. I am so excited to get the rest installed and get on with the tuning process. So let's stop waiting around and let's actually get the rest installed on this KURE. I'm going to be setting up the Hamskea Trinity Hunter. I have removed the cage because the last thing I was doing was shooting 3D and indoor with this rest. So I'm just going to simply bolt this on per manufacturer recommendations. It only comes with one bolt and washer, and that is fine. You can put two rest mounting bolts in here if you really want to, if you really want to feel that your rest is perfectly secure. I just like to eyeball it, making sure that the open sight window here, if you will, of the second burger hole is perfectly in line when I install this Hamskea. Being a Hamskea, you can run it either top limb or bottom limb. I'm going to run it off the bottom limb, and with the older Elite models that I have, the Energy 35 and the Victory 39, they are a solid limb bow, and I just ran them up inside the V and just hooked it on where it started getting wide and the rest cord never moved. This one will actually need that sticky limb pad, and where you set this up the limb is up to the timing of the rest and your personal preference. The further away you set it out, the quicker this rest will pick up and the later it will release. The closer down into where the limb flex is less, it will pick up later and let go earlier. So I kind of put mine right somewhere in the middle, which in this case is right around the R of the decal of KURE. Let's go ahead and mash that on there. I just personally like to tie a cinching knot. I don't need to go with anything fancy here. I don't mind leaving this cord long because I usually end up changing this rest from bow to bow, and depending on the axle to axle length, I don't want to cut it too short on this shorter KURE, and when I go to put on the result later, I don't have an activation cord that's long enough. Beauty of the Hamskea Trinity, I can just slide this down and it is literally set. Check my tension there, it feels pretty darn good. So that's seated down the way I need it to be. Get my O-ring over. Now we have a rest installed and we are ready to start flinging arrows out of this bow. Now, before I start doing that, let me go through this process here, as it can kind of seem a little bit tedious and a little bit lengthy. The first thing I start doing after I install the rest is I just start slinging arrows through it. No sight, no distance. I'm literally making sure that my rest is somewhat centered here at 13/16 from the riser, which is what the Elite manual recommends. And then I just shoot 30, 40, 50 arrows. Like, they can be bare shafts, they can be fletch shafts, they can be all different types of arrows as long as they're not too short. And I'm really just trying to settle in the bow. Like I said earlier, I did already time the cams by putting them into the drawboard and then adding a half twist in the press. But it's a good thing just to kind of get a feel. I'm not putting any sights or stabilizers. I'm not doing any of that yet. I'm just kind of getting a feel for the bow. This will also let me know before I put anything else on here that might rattle. If I didn't tighten down my cam modules or the draw stop modules or the let off mods for the cable stops on this bow, if they're not tightened down all the way, they'll start to rattle now. and I won't have anything else on here except for the rest that could make a noise, and I know that I need to tighten those down. But I'm just kind of settling in the strings. In today's day and age, strings have come a long way from strings of yesteryear. This kind of shooting in process is kind of an outdated thing, but for me, it's just kind of how I break every bow in. It's a system that works for me. It's executed really, really well over the years, and quite frankly, who just doesn't like slinging arrows? So I'm just going to step back here to about 4 or 5 feet and just kind of blind bail into this target for a bit. All right, so I just shot about 35 or 40 shots through the bow here at the blind bail, put it back on the drawboard. Nothing has changed. We're still at 60.8 pounds. We're still at that draw length that I like, that let off percentage that I'm really enjoying right now. The limb stops, nothing has started rattling up and around the cams with the modules. Everything has seated back in super well. So now I'm ready to start adding the peep, the sight, and the stabilizers and getting all that process started, and then eventually putting an arrow through paper and trying to get that bullet hole we're all looking for. All right, so before I start putting the bow back into the press to get the peep installed, I'm actually going to install my sight so I can figure out my actual peep height instead of kind of estimating. So I'm going to be putting on this bow the CBE Engage Hybrid 3-pin. So here's the dovetail mount for it. There are 2 mounting options. You can put it up a little bit higher, put it a little bit lower. I'm going to start in the higher option here. That CBE Engage 3-pin is a little bit of a slider, being a hybrid sight. I'm very excited to use that. It's my first time ever using kind of a hybrid slider sight. So we'll just stick this dovetail on here, get the sight mounted, and then we can draw the bow and figure out where our peep height needs to be. All right, so we got the sight installed, but I'm not even going to put the bow in the press yet. I don't like putting the peep in, kind of estimating where it actually is and then taking it out of the press, drawing the bow, putting it back in the press, all that sort of stuff. I actually will take a pair of scissors first and foremost and cut this a little bit shorter. I don't need it to be this long. It's all twisted up, in particular from shooting the bow so many times in the blind bail session. But what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to take a rubber band. It doesn't have to be a big rubber band or anything fancy. I'm just going to take a rubber band here. I'm going to fold it over itself, loop it over itself, and just kind of cinch it down onto the string. I'm going to put it actually right over that string separator there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the bow with this rubber band here, and I want to put this rubber band knot. You could even do it more than once if you want to make it bigger. I want to put this knot over the sight housing up here when I'm actually at full draw. This will then allow me to put the peep height in an appropriate place. Now, it's not going to be in the perfect spot depending on how I'm going to adjust this sight for my 20-yard pin, 30 or 40, or whatever your kind of average distance is that you're going to be shooting. But I definitely want to use this rubber band first. I can draw the bow multiple times, try the old eyes closed, then open them trick, kind of see where everything's at. I want to make sure it's comfortable because I don't like taking the bow in and out of the press many different times and sliding the peep up and down, in particular when the string is at full pressure. Well, that didn't take long at all. I only had to move about a 1/4 inch down from where I originally put it. I took my silver Sharpie, although black would probably do better on these silver strands of these cables, and I generously marked above and below the rubber band. Now I can just simply pop the rubber band off, and since it's not tied on there, it comes off super clean. I can now put the bow in the press and I can install my peep in that area. Might have to do a smidgen of fine tuning either way, but now I know because I drew the bow about a dozen times, checked that knock height, or excuse me, that peep height rather, and now I'm really easily able to put it in the press, get that peep in, and then I can really ultimately start shooting. All right, so we have the peep installed here. As you can see, I've only tied around the center of the peep and not above and below. Before I get the peep completely installed, tying those knots above and below, I really like to get to know the bow, and by that I mean shoot a whole bunch. If that means shoot for a month, 2 or 3, before I finally figure out that exact peep height. I still also have to figure out a little bit with the sight, being this a hybrid sight, a single pin slider, and a 3-pin fixed pin. There's a lot of different peep adjustments I might still be making. Might be making some release tweaks, whether I'm shooting a hinge or an indexed style release. So I just tie around it for now. That'll keep it with the compression of the strand of the string. It won't pop out, but I don't want to fix it in there with those knots because they're kind of a pain in the butt to remove later. So now we're almost ready to start slinging arrows, but not tuning yet. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. Now we're going to install our stabilizers, anything else on the bow that we would be shooting with. In this case, we're going to be shooting with the torque set from CBE. All right, so like I said, we're going to be shooting the the torque set from CBE. We have an 11-inch bar and a 7-inch bar. Obviously the 11 is from the front of the bow and the 7 is for the back. We have the offset bracket with all the quick disconnect system and of course the mounting. You can use this stabilizer set whether you have an older bow that doesn't have the bushings in the back side of the riser, they only have the one in the front. CBE sells with the pack included the mounting system in the front, so you can offset a sidebar from the front mounting bushing of the stabilizer if you don't have one in the rear of the riser. I'm going to of course be mounting this one to the rear of the riser. Also, the lower you put the weight, the more balanced and bottom heavy the bow is, which is exactly what we want. This is a pretty beefy sight from CBE, this Engage. It's a lot of aluminum, a lot of metal components, and it's really canting the bow away from me as the archer. So I know I'm going to be utilizing that sidebar. And actually, both of these systems come with weights on the front end. 2 1-ouncers each side. I'm actually going to add an ounce to the shorter bar, which is going to go in the back, so I'll have 3 in the back and 1 on the front. And let's see if we can balance this bow out. I'm not going to be tuning this bow until I figure out how I'm comfortable with the balance of it. And this is super important as it comes to the grip and how your hand is getting used to a new bow, which mine's going to have to get used to this. This is a new grip for me, so that's going to take a couple of weeks, maybe a month or 2. And then also with the additions of stabilizers and new sights and new rest, different axle to axle lengths for all that sort of stuff. This is something I want to shoot before I do any tuning. This is a brand new bow. I've been shooting for almost 18 years, and this bow here, even though I'm very used to the Elite brand, I'm very used to high quality equipment, and I'm very used to shooting a lot of arrows of different spines and different tuning and all that sort of stuff. I definitely want to make sure I'm comfortable with the equipment long before I ever start putting a bare shaft through paper. Get the front bar added here, and like I said, I'm going to take off that cap and release the weights here off the front end. There we are. Put this screw back in. I'm going to add that weight to this back bar here by unthreading this a little bit. So now we can install the knuckle on the back side. Of course, we have pitch for up and down, left, right, all sorts of movement here. And I can already tell potentially that this cable right here is going to get in the way of my Allen set. I don't have a bent Allen key that will get into this 1/4 inch Allen bolt here, so I'm going to tighten it up as best I can by hand. I have the quick disconnect already on this 7-inch stabilizer, so I'm just going to throw this on here. And this will just give me something to kind of hold on to as I'm getting this bow all put together. Kind of crank this over just like this, little old trick there. And I can take my 1/4 inch out. I think I'm gonna have to pull this cable back, but that's okay. That doesn't do any harm to the bow whatsoever. And then I can push, pull, cinch that down tight. Just pull that cable out of the way, no problem there. Very flexible in the cable systems. Don't ever panic about your bow moving these things around. They're supposed to move around. They get shot way more violently than you ever will squeezing them. All right, so here's kind of a ballpark angle here for this system. You can see I'm kind of maybe like a 10-degree down, and I'm a few inches away from the cam here, maybe about 3.5 inches away from the bottom cam. We're gonna test this out, and I'm gonna be playing around with this knuckle, getting the up and down, left, right to offset the weight here. And I don't want to have any impartial torque to overcome this weight. I want this weight to just naturally allow this bow to cradle in my hand. That's what I'm saying. This might take a while for us to get this set up to exactly the way we want and exactly the way we need, so that when we go to tune, we're not adding any impartial torque, any bias or anything, and we can have a perfectly shooting arrow. All right, so we started from the beginning of checking out our bow specs. We added our D-loop, we got our peep and our rest and our sight. We have our stabilizers in a ballpark area. Now we have our arrows built. We got our rest and our release ready to go. And now all we have to do is fill our quivers and start hitting the range. And now we are focusing on the comfortable feel and nature of the bow. We want this to be as comfortable and smooth a process as possible. We don't want anything to feel forced force. And this is in particular when you start throwing on back bars. If you've never used a back bar before, which is actually something that I've never done either, using a back bar is going to add a lot of different counterbalance, and I can tell you what, I am already loving it. The weight of this sight is wonderful, it's great, it's well built, it's robust, but it really adds a lot of cant to the bow, I noticed. But as soon as I threw this on here, added that extra ounce back here, and then also I brought this in pretty close to the riser. I actually probably only have it about maybe 2 3/4, 3 inches away from the riser, and that right now feels excellent. And so I really can't wait to start slinging arrows out of this bow. And I don't care if the arrows aren't flying perfectly right now. I'm going to set my rest at the manufacturer's Elite's recommendations of 13/16, and I'm just going to sight in my pins, and I'm just going to enjoy this bow for a few weeks. Get 2, 3 weeks, maybe even a month into the bow, get several hundred shots through it, really enjoy it. If I see that the arrows are really flying wonky, maybe then I will step back and do a little bit of tuning through paper just to make sure that they're not flying dangerously or super erratically. But if I'm getting good arrow flight and I'm getting good groups at 20, 30, 40, and 50 yards, I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm just going to enjoy the bow. And then after I get all the tweaks and things figured out, make sure nothing has moved, put the bow back into the drawboard, make sure that our strings and cables haven't stretched prematurely and we have to throw a twist back in, then I can start the tuning process. So it's been a little bit over a week since I initially set up the bow and started shooting it, and it is feeling awesome. I'm really enjoying the KURE so far. And now it is time to start bareshaft tuning and getting our arrows ready to be fletched and actually start grouping and sighting in with our particular setup. When I'm just shooting around, I could shoot any arrows I want, fletch, bare shafts. I just want to get a good feel for the bow, how I'm shooting it, how it's balancing, play with the stabilizer weights, play with how the sight is positioned closer or further away from the riser. I don't want to be messing with all of the tuning of the bow until I have that all figured out. And that takes me a week or 2 weeks or more, so be it. I want to be comfortable with the bow well before I start shooting it. So now we need two things, of course, to start this bareshaft tuning process. We need a bare shaft. In this case, this is a Victory VFT KO in 300 spine. It's almost full length from the factory. It's 31 inches, the standard insert, and 125 grain point. And you also need a way to paper tune, shoot through paper in order to see that bare shaft tear and try to work towards that bullet hole. Now you can build a paper tuning stand out of PVC or wood or something. I have my own, but I want to show an even simpler way that you can do it, and that's by taking your bow box. I got a lot of them sitting around the shop. This is from one of my older Elites, and I cut out a smaller rectangle on this side and a larger rectangle on the back, and I've simply taped a piece of 8.5 by 11 copier paper. I like using a stiffer paper. Some people will use a wax paper or newspaper. I kind of like that 8.5 by 11 sheet of standard weight copier paper or something even a little bit thicker, and that'll really help show those finite tears and really see that left, right, up, down. If you use something that's too loose and too flimsy, you'll get tears in all sorts of different directions. It won't tear cleanly, and you don't get a really nice tune out of it. So I'm basically going to set this box up. As you see, it's the full length box. This held a Victory 39 in it, and I have the paper up as high as I can get it. But that still doesn't mean that I'm going to be standing in order to paper tune. I'm 6'4", I'm a pretty tall guy, so I'm actually going to have to shoot on my knees and shoot through the paper in order to get that nice level knock travel. I don't want to be shooting down at an angle or up at an angle because that will show an improper tear. I want to try to be as parallel to the ground, shooting perpendicular into the target as possible. So I basically have my box leaning up against a Morel Big High Roller. I have another Morel Big High Roller just a few yards down range in order to catch the arrow. I have ample space between the paper and the target, so that way I don't impact the target first and cause that arrow to kick one direction and tear the paper improperly because I didn't have proper clearance. So now I'm just basically going to lower the camera, get down on my knees so I'm nice and parallel, and shoot through the paper and see what kind of tear we get. A few other things to note here. It's great that I'm able to do this outside, but I prefer to do it in a non-windy environment. We still have about a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind. My box keeps falling over, so I have an arrow there stuck into the ground to keep it from tipping towards me. But it's optimal if you can do this in a garage or at your local shop or in your basement so you don't get any wind impact. I think I'll be okay. I like to start at a very short distance anyway. We're only about maybe 6, 7 feet away from the paper. I don't want to start any further away than that. I want to catch this arrow pretty quick coming right out of the bow so I can catch and rectify those tuning errors long before they get even more egregious downrange. So after the first shot, I see I have a low and right tear. That means the tip of the arrow has impacted, and then the rest of the shaft has come down and to the right, and the nock has entered the paper low and to the right. Now, I don't want to specifically go off of that. I'm going to shoot that exact same arrow again before I get anywhere through the tuning process and make sure that my tears are consistent. If you're shooting the same arrow over and over and over again and you're not getting consistent tears, you know that's kind of a shooter problem, and maybe you still go back to shooting the bow, getting more consistent before you continue on with paper tuning. All right, second shot, same exact result, low and right tear. So now I'm going to start the nock tuning process. Now the nock tuning process is pretty lengthy, and I don't want to, for the sake of the length of this video, go into all the ins and outs of nock tuning. If you click on the card on the screen or follow the link in the description below to my full nock tuning video on how I tune each and every single arrow I shoot, I strongly recommend you follow that. I'm just going to simply nock tune off camera, but if you want to get more of that in-depth profile, follow those links, watch that video, and you'll see exactly what I'm about to do. All right, so after shooting that same exact arrow and rotating the nock for a little bit of nock tune, I was able to get to almost a perfect bullet hole, but it's still just a little nock low and right. And that is okay. I'm gonna try to get all of my arrows nock tuned to that nock low and nock right, and hopefully they're all spine indexed that exact same way. And then I can go into the process of moving my rest, or what I'm gonna do, play with the S.E.T technology. Okay, so I've gone and shot another arrow, and it's the exact same tear, just slightly right and slightly low. So with the S.E.T technology, I can rectify the left and right, but I do need to move my rest to account for that nock low. Now, when I'm up high with my point for the up and down, I need to lower my point to get it in line with the nock, and if my point was low, I need to raise it. Now, for the left and right, it's a little bit different, but since we have the S.E.T technology, we don't even have to mess with moving the rest left and right and taking out a true center shot. So first things first, since I'm a bit nock low, little point high, I'm going to come over here to my hamski, and having a micro adjust rest like this where all you have to do is loosen a bolt and then you can loosen your drawstring. This is a limb driven drop away rest. The nice thing is I can just loosen that activation cord and I can simply move this up. So I'm moving it down because my point is a little bit high. Set that back tight and I'm done with that. Now I can come up here to my S.E.T technology, and ironically, the same Allen key size fits both my hamski and the S.E.T technology. And that's a good idea too if you want to just take that one loose Allen key to be able to manipulate your S.E.T technology when you're on the range or if you're at your local indoor shoot at your local shop. It's a good idea. We have a tightening screw here, or a lock screw, and then we have the actual adjustment screw, and it's very clearly labeled which direction I need to go. For a tail right tear, I need to add a clockwise motion. For a tail left tear, I need to go counterclockwise. I don't have that much to move. I'm maybe gonna go probably a quarter turn here. So I'm just gonna loosen this up. Don't have to over tighten that, definitely. And being a tail right tear, I'm gonna go about a quarter turn. So here I'm about 3 o'clock on a clock face. I'm gonna go to about 6 o'clock on the clock face. That might even be too far. We'll have to see. I can tighten that back down. And I have to do the same thing for the bottom cam. Right now we're at about 9 o'clock. I'm gonna go closer to noon. Lock that back down. I'm not locking anything super tight right now because I don't know how much adjustment I'm going to need. And let's shoot one of our arrows that we know is already doing that nock low and right tear, and let's see what kind of tear we get through paper. And with just that little bit of movement, we just shot an absolute perfect bullet hole in about 5 minutes worth of work. Let's take the camera over there and let's see what we're actually looking at here. And I am just blown away by this S.E.T technology. No camera tricks, no gimmicks. 5 minutes, never had to leave my knees. One Allen key, and we've already rectified that. So let's take the camera over and see what we're talking about. Okay, so here's our full paper of all of the tears that we were doing when we shot multiple different arrows. Here was the very first shot that I took. You'll see the point impacted up here. If I kind of push the paper back through, you can kind of see we have that more bullet point up here at the top, and then it kind of just has this ugly tear where the Nock came through here at the bottom. I then rotated the Nock following the Nock tuning process, and I got to this one. Still Nock low and right, but not as bad. A little bit more movement, and I moved too far here, and so I went back to here, and I ended up shooting this tear right here. Shot another arrow to confirm, and I got this same slightly Nock low and still definitely Nock right. You can see the bullet point here and where this is kind of torn here. Using just a little bit of the S.E.T technology, adding that quarter twist, we have this absolutely perfect bullet hole right here. I'll punch it through again. You can see this absolutely perfect bullet hole through the paper. I could not be more impressed. This is literally 5 minutes worth of tuning. I already had the arrow built exactly the way I want it. Again, this is a Victory VF-TKO right here. The standard arrow with the standard insert, 125 grain point. I knew what I needed to be shooting in terms of spine and arrow length, and just a little bit of adjustment, just a little bit of movement. I got a perfect bullet hole in what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shots. And now I can repeat this process, the Nock tuning process, see what all of my arrows are doing. If I need to have a little bit of movement left or right, that S.E.T technology is so super simple and so super clean. I never had to move my rest out of true center shot, and we're shooting this perfect bullet hole. Okay, and as a complete side note, I just had to try this out. So I didn't Nock tune all of the arrows. I only had Nock tuned that one. And since these Victory arrows, these VF-TKOs, are spine aligned, I wanted to try actually with the S.E.T technology and that spine alignment from the factory if they would shoot bullet holes with the one that I had already Nock tuned. So there was that first initial arrow over there, and then I shot the other 3 arrows, and look at this perfect 3 bullet holes here at about 6-7 feet from the target. No Nock tuning, just using the spine alignments direct from the factory, using the S.E.T technology, and it's already perfect. I don't have to Nock tune these arrows at all. I can fletch these up, and they're ready for the range and ready for the hunting woods. This is blowing my mind right now. I am not gonna lie. I am truly amazed at both the S.E.T technology on the KURE, and of course this would apply to the Elite Result as well, but also with these Victory arrows, I am absolutely blown away. I've never had arrows like this directly from the factory spine aligned, or a bow like this tuned so quickly and so easily with just a few turns of an Allen screw. So that's all for the setup and review. All I have to do now is fletch up my Victory arrows and hit the range. And if you have any questions that I didn't address in this video, I know it was a long one, follow the links in the description below. Hit me up on Facebook and Instagram. My email is always down there if you want that more personal connection. And of course, you can always leave a comment here on YouTube. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery, archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful sunshiny creation, and we'll get to see you next time.